Okay, hi. My name is Dr. Pat Knox-Solo. I'm a cultural geographer in the geography department of the University of Birmingham. I want to talk to you today about a project which is Leverhulme funded called the Caribbean Insecurities and Creativity project. I almost forgot what it was called then. This project looks at insecurity within the Caribbean and how it's negotiated on a day-to-day basis. What I mean by that is that there's been quite a few shifts within how we understand insecurity since the turn of the century for the last couple of decades. We've started to think beyond simply talking about terrorism, political ideas of insecurity or military ideas of insecurity, to think much more widely about human insecurity, environmental insecurity and livelihood insecurity. So we're drawing in a much broader definition of what insecurity means. We've also begun to think much less then about one-off incidents which are life-threatening notions of insecurity to much more chronic and diffuse ideas and expressions of what insecurity means. So how do people negotiate insecurity on a day-to-day basis has been something that we've started to think about. So that means that insecurity isn't just about security professionals, it's about everyone, about communities and households, it's about non-governmental organisations, and it's about artists. And we've begun to think beyond exceptional spaces, for example, battlefields or dark alleyways at night, to think about everyday interactions. How does insecurity get negotiated? How do you and I make each other feel safe? Or how is my insecurity different from your insecurity? How do we think about that through embodied interactions? It's something that I'm particularly interested in as a human geographer. How do we think about insecurity when we dance together? How do we think about insecurity when we shake hands? How do we think about insecurity in all sorts of embodied interactions on a day-to-day basis? This is particularly interesting within the Caribbean because the Caribbean is a place that's geopolitically very interesting. It's between North America and South America, for example. It has lots of post-colonial connections with Europe. It has lots of diasporic connections with Africa and Asia, and it has lots of economic relationships with the rising powers, China and India. So the Caribbean is a particularly interesting place to think about the everyday and to think about how we negotiate insecurity on an everyday basis. The Caribbean is also really interesting because it has lots of environmental insecurities, lots of threatened environmental resources, coral reefs, etc., and lots of natural hazards to negotiate day by day, hurricanes, volcanoes, etc. Really interesting region geomorphologically. Also, the Caribbean is very interesting in terms of the everyday negotiation of livelihoods. There's lots of mobility in the Caribbean, lots of migration. There are lots of social and political pressures, and there's a global flow of all sorts of trade in goods, but also all sorts of illegal firearms and drugs, etc. So all sorts of really interesting things happening in the Caribbean. We can think of it as a region that is interesting in itself, but also has lots to tell us about global insecurities. So the Caribbean is a distinctive region with a wide range of active international connections, and that makes it really interesting to look at in terms of insecurity. We can think about the Caribbean and its insecurities, or the negotiation between security and insecurity. We can think about it in terms of creative practice, literature and music and dance that's not only just produced and consumed locally, but is also consumed internationally. We can think about the Caribbean insecurity and security and how they're negotiated by the poorest people in terms of their basic needs and in terms of their livelihoods. How do people get sustainable access to food when employment might be quite difficult to get hold of? How do people make sure that agricultural systems, aquacultural systems and creative industries where people find a great deal of employment, that those are sustainable and able to guarantee food for the future? And how do people negotiate their security and their insecurity in public spaces? So how do they think about music and lyrics? How do they think about dress? How do they think about dance? And how do they think about graffiti? And how do all of these contribute to a sense of security or insecurity? So the Kariski network has seven participants. There's myself as the lead investigator. There's Kevin Riney from the University of the West Indies. There's Ron Cummings from Brock University, Susan Mains from Dundee University, Rivka Jaffa from the University of Amsterdam, and Dave Featherston from the University of Glasgow. We also have a network facilitator called Caroline Marias. We'll have lots of events that are coming up in the next couple of years. The project runs until December 2018, so we hope that you'll see more on the website and want to get involved. Bye.